Hello and welcome back. So this is going to be our second to last video, unless I decide to go on again and again and again about ecology. But we're just going to kind of touch on ecology a little bit. Anyway, but speaking of, so let's go ahead and finish up the animal kingdom, shall we? And of course, I have my ever-present animal friend, Monty, here, because he, like we do, is stealing my glasses. Why do you do that? There, stay out of it. But anyway, Monty, like we do, have backbones. I've actually surprised people with that fact. I'm not entirely sure why, but some people seem to think that snakes don't have bones. But they have a backbone and a skull and a whole bunch of ribs. And in Monty's case, he even has what's left of hips and the legs in snakes, which is right here on Monty. Ta-da! I know I'm showing you his rear end. But anyway, so the pythons and the boas are the ones that have what's left of when snakes had legs. Another species has that. That's because the pythons and the boas are, evolutionarily speaking, some of the oldest. So anyway, Monty's like, well, they also have some neat adaptations in the fact that their jawbone isn't actually attached right here, so that way it also unhinges when they eat something. So that's how snakes can eat something twice the size of their head. Unfortunately, snakes are not good at gauging what is twice the size of their head, as some have tried to eat things way too big for them to fit and actually killed themselves doing it. So yeah, they're not the swiftest bunch. Anyway, a lot of people fear them. I understand why. They are freaky. But at the same time, they're kind of stupid. But then again, that could be said for a lot of animals in the animal kingdom. Anyway, speaking of, so again, we were looking at this at the beginning. We talked about pretty much everybody up till here when we finally figured out, hey, since we're going ahead and we're civilization, we're sticking our heads in one place, and we got organization now that we have a coelom, which is somewhere where we can keep all of our organs away from everything else, so it isn't just one big mishmash together like potato salad. And then we get body segmentation. Notice body segmentation popped up several times. So again, an example of coevolution, where a trait popped up several different times in several different places. And then finally, hey, how about we organize our nervous system so that we've got one avenue to control everything, which became the backbone. And this is where we're going to start in with the second half of the animal kingdom, which is the vertebrates, or those of us with a backbone. Because we decided, hey, we've also got to get up on their land and go colonize it, even though the insects already beat us to it. Crazy insects. So, and if you remember from the plant kingdom, the angiosperms went and looked at the insects and say, hey, pollinators, you want to work with us? And the insect said, free food, man, all right. You know, basically how you get anybody to show up to a party. You just say free food or free alcohol, depending on the party. Anyway, so let's go ahead and talk about backbones. So keep in mind, somebody came up with a notochord, which is kind of the first type of backbone. We're going to see this again and again especially in the fishes, but we have a chordate ancestor who started organizing their nervous system, which before this, it was sort of organized, but not with a central backbone for the cephalization to have all the thoughts in the head bit, but still get the communication down to the rear end bit. Because I don't know about you, kind of like a little distance between my head and my rear end. Just me, you know. Some of the non, vertebrate really didn't think about that too much. Like sea cucumbers, their mouth and their butt is the same hole. So, thank goodness we decided not to do that. But anyway, so it's split off, and we got astroderms and the jawless fishes. Now, the jawless fish kind of pops up a couple of times, and you'll see this again, where again we got to pop out, and we get the cartilaginous fishes, and then we go for the bony fishes. Now, keep in mind, that these guys are still living in the ocean. So they didn't really have to contend with things like drying out or gravity without water supporting them, because they've got water supporting them. I mean, who doesn't like floating in the water? And you don't really have to worry about, oh, my back hurts, because you've got the water supporting you. So these guys didn't have to figure out how not to dry out and how not to have their eggs dry out. Because again, what they did, a lot of fishes, and especially if you've ever had roe, fish eggs are a delicacy. That's caviar. I like it myself. Not caviar. I've never had caviar, but I've had roe, which is, basically fish eggs on sushi and stuff. I like it. What do you think, Monty? Because I've never had it. So, again, they don't need internal reproduction because, again, they're in the middle of the water. All they have to do is the female lays the eggs and the male has to just go over it and release his sperm, and bada bing, the ocean is there. So, therefore, yes. So anyway, and that's basically how these guys get along. Now, eventually, because the ocean was just overcrowded several times and occasionally died off several times, because of this overcrowding, some creatures got pushed and said, hey, have you heard from the insects in the plant kingdom? They said that land sounds pretty sweet. And some of them said, yeah, let's try it out. But the problem is, again, they had to come up with how not to dry out. And just like the plant kingdom had to come up with how not to dry out, because what does everything kind of hinge on when it comes to living things? Water and lack of it in a lot of cases. So that's where the amphibians are kind of like the plant kingdom's version of the mosses, liverworts and hornworts. These guys can live on land, but for reproduction and breathing, they need to stay where it is wet, or else they dry out and then they can't breathe because they breathe through their skin. Eventually, somebody got it together where, hey, maybe if we have a protective coating like those plants in their waxy cuticle, not that they were looking at it at the time, not that they were going, I need to develop my own waxy cuticle. It's just, again, physics and whatnot. Put pressure on creatures. If you want to live on land and you don't want to dry out, you better get some kind of coating to keep all your liquids on the inside. And so reptiles like Monty came up with skin with scales. And, of course, where did those come from? Scales, like from fish. So, and then the reptiles split off in a different ways, a lot of different ways. They were primitive reptiles. So primitive reptiles split off into kind of three ways and went to what we know now as modern reptiles, like Monty. Yes, Monty, you're very modern. Actually, he's not that modern. Don't tell him. I don't even know if that'd be insulting. Anyway, be told you're not modern. Like I said, boas and constrictors are some of the older types of snakes. But eventually, the split off of the dinosaurs came off the reptile, the modern, soon-to-be modern reptiles, not current modern reptiles. So, way back when. Split off and we get dinosaurs right here. Yeah, dinosaurs. Oh, man. I still haven't seen any of the later Jurassic Park movies. Oops. I saw the first three because they were cool. And then after that, I went, Again, every kid who was born and raised in the 80s and the 90s, we all wanted to be paleontologists, man. That's what I wanted to be when I was a little girl. If you asked me, I was like, I'm going to be a paleontologist. Anyway, I'll get off that. Anyway, so dinosaurs, like I said, split here, and then dinosaurs died out, but one of their splits turned into what we know as birds. So birds are literally the descendants of dinosaurs, which would explain a few things if you've ever fought a chicken. I'm just saying, have you seen chickens? Have you been on a farm? And then in other cases, you look at them and you go, I can see where the dinosaur is, but I can't see where anything else is. I've got a neighbor right now who bought two turkeys he's going to raise to eat for Thanksgiving, and they keep escaping and coming over to my house. And I walk outside and go, what you guys doing here? And they just look at me like, and like I'm going to give them food. Anyway, so how far have the dinosaurs fallen? But then, you know, I've got a rooster on the other end from my neighbors who keeps chickens, and whoo boy, no, like I said, some birds still retain their dinosaur vigor, others not so much. But primitive reptiles also split not only into modern reptiles, but they also split into what is now mammals. And I'll get into some weird fun facts on that end as well coming in here. So, mammals, and that's us. And you can actually see where the relationships are if you look at scales under a microscope, feathers under a microscope, and actually mammal hair under a microscope. They all have scales, pretty much. Scales, of course, look like scales, but feathers look like modified scales. And that's literally what they are. They're just modified scales to cover up the dinosaurs, but also eventually they figured out how to use it to fly. That wasn't originally, we're kind of torn on what it was originally. We think it was just covering because, you know, living on land, it isn't all hot and warm and muggy all the time, especially when plate tectonics is happening and all that other crazy stuff and the plant kingdom occasionally shutting down the planet. But if you look at a hair under a microscope, you can kind of see how it looks like it's all these, you know, the hair itself looks like a whole bunch of overlapping scales over a shaft or a core. And so, again, you can see, and another thing you can find out, and it's really wild is go through teeth, how teeth evolved. It's nuts, because not all tooth structure, is the same between any of these guys. And so one of the major things you can actually learn while looking at all of these guys is checking out tooth structure. It's actually really weird, fascinating, and complicated. More complicated than you think it would be. So anyway, so there's an overview of the vertebrate family tree, so let's go ahead and get into it. So, first group we're going to talk about are the tourniquets, lancelets, jawless fishes, lampreys, hagfishes, and sharks, or sturgeon. So, these guys have a tail. They kept their tail, their post-anal tail. Now, this is another thing that you see in chordates. Some of us have a notochord, which is the beginnings of a vertebra, so having an actual spine. It's actually, a notochord is a flexible rod used for support. It's the beginnings of a backbone. It's a dorsal hollow nerve cord. It's there, again, we're organizing our nervous system and kind of keeping the head at one end and the other stuff at the other end. So, now, interestingly enough, they keep their postnatal tail. Not everybody does that. Us, you know, humans, we got rid of ours a long time ago. When we were fetuses, yeah, we actually had a little bit of a tail. And over time, we just absorb it, and now we don't have a tail, which would be, I know it sucks. I know some of you probably are like, I would love a tail. But we actually, I was just reading some recent research to actually shows that we actually had to basically make an evolutionary choice. Now, I'm not saying we actually sat there and thought about it and took a vote or anything, but out of the primates, either they went with having thumbs for that extra grip connection point for climbing and whatnot, or just doing stuff, or you could go with having a prehensile tail. And that's where a major split in primates went. The ones that chose, yeah, they need that fifth point of contact to make them stable while climbing or even on the ground. A lot of them went with thumbs, and that's the branch we're out of. We have thumbs, so we can text and other things. But other, primates went with, hey, we don't need thumbs. Silly you. And they still have thumbs, but not like ours. Ours are extremely articulated. So they don't have the grip factor that we do, or the, absolute joint that we've got right here that we can do this and have thumb wars. They can't quite do the thumb war thing. So they went with having a prehensile tail as that fifth point of contact. And by fifth, I mean, hands and feet. So we went with thumbs. Thumbs up for thumbs, I guess. And there was a split, and the other group went with tails to help them with that fifth point of contact for grip and climbing and doing all sorts of stuff. So, whereas Monty went with nothing, just his body. Not that Monty knew that. Anyway, so, getting back to this. So again, some of us, you'll see the post-anal tail. That's a thing. It'll start disappearing and coming back again. It's interesting. But the notochord is the big thing right here, that flexible rod used for support in the back. Now, another thing that these guys all have is they have pharyngeal slits. They do not have true gills. Gills are kind of a different jump up. So instead of trying to get oxygen out of the water, because the water is oxygenated, if you've ever had fish and you have to get the filter thing and it has to pump the oxygen into the water, yeah, congratulations. Yeah, and if you don't do that, some fish just drop dead because there's not enough oxygen in the water and they've used it all up. Same thing with the ocean and lakes and rivers and stuff. Oxygenated water is a big deal. But water carries oxygen a lot easier than us sucking it out of the atmosphere. So to do that, they use these pharyngeal slits, and you can see it on this lamprey right here, which will make me go, bleh. I'm not a fan of lampreys. I mean, just bleh. Anyway, so, and I'll get into that in a minute, but they have these, and here's a whole bunch of different types of pharyngeal slits that you can see in filter feeders and sharks and whatnot. So these are not true gills. We're not to the true gills yet. That's a fish thing. Fish got the gills. Sharks got the pharyngeal slits. I did not name these. Anyway, so these guys right here, what happens is they suck the water in and it passes through their, circulatory system. They have an open circulatory system. It's not closed like ours. And basically the body sucks in the oxygen it needs and kicks it back out. And it's more of a flow thing. It's not so much, a lot of the times it's in through the mouth, out through the slits. That's why, if you've ever noticed, a lot of the times the sharks and everybody kind of have their mouth slightly agape. And there's some sharks that can't stop swimming because of this. If they don't have muscles, and that's another gill thing, they don't have muscles to push all the water through. And that's a fish thing. Some sharks have it, some sharks don't. The older sharks definitely don't, and there are some sharks that, unfortunately, if they can't swim, they drown. They will literally drown, which is why I'm completely and utterly against fishing sharks for shark fin soup. Shark meat is not edible at all. It's disgusting, and that's why we don't eat sharks. Orca, on the other hand, have no freaking problem with that, and we'll get into their shenanigans later. Because we used to think the number one predator in the ocean are sharks, and the orcas in the corner are going, hold my fin. Anyway, I'll get to that story later. So, a lot of these guys can't stop swimming. If they stop swimming, they don't have the water going through, and because they don't have the water going through, they drown. Now, some of them have figured out muscles so they can push it through, so they don't drown, so they can just pause for a minute and go, oh. Like, unfortunately, these disgusting lampreys. And sorry, there's very few creatures on this planet I consider disgusting, and the only ones that I consider disgusting are pretty much lampreys. I love everything else, like blobfishes. I think they're adorable. They're so ugly, they're cute. Anyway. There's other creatures I feel like that too. Anyway, but long story short, again, I keep saying that. These guys, basically what they do to eat is they latch onto something and then pretty much drill a hole through it. They're like remoras, except not really. See all that teeth right there? Yeah, they just hang on and drill a hole. And they, unfortunately, will destroy entire fish populations doing this. I know in the Great Lakes, these guys have become invasive, and they have been killing off a lot of fish in the Great Lakes. So if you've ever gone up to the Great Lakes and you see a lamprey hanging onto a fish, feel free to pull it off and stomp the poo out of it. Because, anyway. However, they do mostly live in the ocean, and they don't really like humans. So, thank goodness for that. I would hate to go swimming and have one of these guys attached to me. Although I think you'd feel it. Because unlike leeches, they have the numbing and the anticoagulants. These guys don't. They don't. Anyway, this is a hagfish. They're basically makers of slime and really bad wallets. If you've ever seen cheap wallets and it says made of 100% eel leather, it's actually a hagfish, not an eel. Eel is not a hagfish. So they lied to you twice. Hagfish, when they freak out, they produce slime. That's their main number one defense, is just they will slime you. If you look up on the internet, there was a car accident and somebody was transporting a bunch of hagfish, and I'm why are you transporting a bunch of hagfish in your trunk? I don't know, but if you look it up, the whole car is covered in slime because the hagfish freaked out during the crash, and I don't blame them, do you? I'd freak out. I bet in a car crash, light ones, not crazy ones, and even then I freaked out, so I can imagine. And the whole car was just covered in slime. So they don't make a little bit, and they make a lot. They also have a cartilaginous internal skeleton. So finally we're getting to a skeleton, but not a true skeleton. So it's kind of made of the sub stuff that makes up your nose, the cartilage in your nose, and in your ears. However, cutting through that and having to dissect it is harder than cutting through bone. I do not know why, because cartilage is softer, but I had to dissect a shark and get out its brain and its senses for smell, which are huge. It's actually bigger than the brain. Sharks have an amazing sense of smell. I know they're like, they can smell blood for miles away. It's more than that. Their olfactory bulbs are like the size of, I'm trying to think. Depending on the shark, they're really big. And they have 2 olfactory bulbs, and they have a major nerve that leads back to their itty-bitty brain, which is right behind the huge olfactory. So it's an interesting thing to look at, a shark brain. And I had to cut it out, and I was graded on how well I could cut it out of the shark without damaging the nervous system. And I'm going to tell you right now, chopping through cartilage, I don't know how, is harder than chopping through bone. Probably because it resists. It's more flexible, therefore it's more resistant pain. But it works for sharks. They've been around since even before the time of the dinosaurs, ancient sharks. Keep in mind, these are all modern sharks. Although we do have some insanely long-lived species of sharks, like my friend, the, I think it's the greenwich shark. They live under Arctic ice, and some of them we have sampled, they're like near 200 years old. They go blind because they just hang out under Arctic ice, and that's about it. One decided to go south for the winter. It was interesting. Freaked out all of us scientists going, "What are you doing down here?" And it was just like, I don't know. I just wanted to change the scenery. Even though their eyeballs are not even functional. So, I don't know. He just went on vacation. And freaked out a whole bunch of people going, "Why are you down here in the warmer waters?" And he's just like, "Why can't I go for a stroll?" So, they're 200. They do what they want. A lot of these guys do what they want. We find out more and more about sharks. Fun fact about swimming with sharks, if you've ever thought about it, depends on the shark species. Monty, no, you can't. He's changing the things again because I'm talking too much about sharks. Lemon sharks are known to drive off tiger sharks because they get jealous of divers petting them. Yeah, they literally get jealous. So we've been learning, the more we interact with sharks, the more we learn that maybe Jaws was wrong. Because sharks are actually neat. You can also flip them over on their back, and they actually go into this stupor. So you can roll them over and pet them on their tummy. Though it's hard to get them to roll over when they're just as big as you are, even underwater. So you've got to know what you're doing. Don't just go down, my teacher told me I can roll this shark. Please don't. Also, not all sharks, like the biggest shark is the whale shark. He actually does not have teeth. He has, like whales, kind of has feathery stuff. It's not baleen. It's similar to, but not the same thing. Their teeth are for filter feeding, so they eat plankton too. Everybody eats plankton, which is why I sometimes pity plankton in SpongeBob. Anyway. So again, another thing I want to throw in here is heart evolution. I said teeth evolution's crazy. Oh, well, let's talk about hearts. Because again, we need, Monty, stop. No, you can't control where this conversation's going. I mean, you could, but please stop touching the thing. He's just going to move everything around. Anyway, you're going to notice here, again, how we get oxygen out of wherever medium we're in, whether it be in the ocean or, up here on land and not trying to dry out, and pumping it around our bodies. And we've gone from a 2-chambered heart in the fish all the way up to a 4-chambered heart in mammals. Now, it's interesting because reptiles kind of went at it in a whole bunch of different ways. So we just had one aorta and one ventricle, and the ventricle, notice, has all the muscles around it to pump through the gills, where the gills are, again, water is being pumped in the reverse against the flow of the blood, which is, again, really clever to make blood going one way and the water getting pumped across it the other way to force oxygen to go back and forth and carbon dioxide to go out. So, again, notice they don't need a crazy heart to pump the blood countercurrent to the water that's being pumped across through the gills. So they just need a 2-chambered heart just to keep it going. And fish are fine with that. They have one circuit, it's all good. However, the minute we try to get up and land, things get a little more difficult because now we're not just, swimming, we're not, aerodynamically correct for the water. Frogs, on the other hand, and everybody else who had to go and conquer the land for, vertebrates, because the invertebrates were already conquered it in the insect dimension, or B, were hanging out in the ocean going, I don't feel like that just seems like so much effort. Anyway, so frogs came up with 2 circuits that pretty much dominates all the way through. However, they came up with a 3-chambered heart with 1 ventricle and 2 aortas. Again, the aortas will drop the blood into the ventricle where it mixes, which is not very efficient because we're having deoxygenated blood and oxygenated blood dumping into the same ventricle to get pushed out around the body and also back to the lungs. So when you're mixing the 2 things, that doesn't mean everybody's getting enough oxygen, and all the blood that already picked up oxygen is back in the lung like, I already got oxygen. What am I doing here? So, again, isn't exactly great, but then again, frogs and, salamanders and all these guys, again, they basically living half in water, half in, some of them all in water, like axolotls. They don't want to come out of the water because if they do, they'll lose their outer gills and turn into a salamander. And then they wouldn't be cute little axolotls anymore. They look like freaky lizards. So anyway, and that's not a healthy way for axolotls to live. So, long story short, they've got the 2 chambers. The 3-chamber heart, it's an improvement, man, but at the same time, it's not that efficient. But that's okay, because they don't need it to be that terribly efficient. However, when we just finally divorced ourselves of the water and had to keep everything on the inside, this is where reptiles kind of went a little bit cray-cray. And by crazy, I mean they were tried every which way. So here's a improved version of the 3-chambered heart. It's divided. You can kind of see where the ventricle has sections to it. It's divided into chambers, but they're not complete. So turtles, lizards, Monty right here, we call this the 5-chambered heart with quotation marks because these chambers aren't full chambers. So it's kind of a... crocodiles, on the other hand, got it together with a 4-chambered heart, and it's working pretty good. And although it has an extra line between the ventricle and going there, which is a little weird, but hey, are you really going to tell a crocodile his heart's weird? A circulatory system strange? I don't think so. Unless you're like me and you've had crocodile meat and it's delicious. I'm just saying. It's a Lauren eat crocodile kind of world. So if you ever see me wrestling a crocodile, it's probably because I really want to eat crocodile meat that day. It's like sweet chicken. I don't know how else to explain it. It's really good. Anyway, birds on the other hand. Now birds and mammals came to kind of the same Again, an example of coevolution, because remember, birds jumped off of reptiles. Well, first they jumped off of dinosaurs, and then they jumped off of, dinosaurs. So reptiles to dinosaurs to birds. And dinosaurs pretty much said, hey, this 4-heart pattern works great. Now we can be huge because there's a ton of oxygen in the air because of all the plant kingdom already formatting the earth for us and pumping out all this oxygen for us to get huge. So birds have a 2 circuits, 4-chambered heart, just like mammals do. Does not mean we're related. We came up with the same thing because it was honestly the best working, best working thing for being on the land 24/7. So again, this is an example of coevolution. Birds came up with it, and mammals came up with the same thing way further down the road. So bada bing, bada boom, where the reptiles were trying some things out, what came out the other end shows up twice because it's so nice and really efficient. However, birds are a little less efficient than mammals. Mammals really got it going good. Birds actually do occasionally die of heart attacks more than mammals do, and we die of heart attacks probably because we, our diet more than anything else. So, long story short, birds came up with it first, but it wasn't as good, whereas mammals came up with it last, and it's pretty good. One of my students last semester said, so it's like McDonald's, when your mom says, hey, yeah, the mammals say, I have a 4-chambered heart, and the birds say, I want a 4-chambered heart, and their mom says, yeah, we have a 4-chambered heart at home. And that's not as good. That's what one of my students took away from that. I was like, yeah, I guess. Except birds came up with it first. So, Again, ours was a bit more tested. Maybe. Anyway, so that brings us to the fish. Again, the notochord may still be there. So you will still see this notochord if you look at some of the fish. Not all of them. Some of them have dumped it for an actual spine. It just depends. They have a very bony skeleton. And their skeleton isn't so much, it is for structure and it is for shape. But it's not necessarily for dealing with gravity. It does, however, deal very, very well with pressure gradients. Because they have so many bones, and they're not exactly connected like ours are. And if you've ever eaten a fish and had to spit out a gazillion bones, you know what I'm talking about. And the fact that their skeleton can actually collapse and expand. And you need this for going through different pressure differentials in the ocean or any kind of body of water that's large enough. I mean, if you go down far enough, this is why we have to have subs and suits, because if you go down far enough, we don't deal well with that kind of pressure. We just kind of go, which, was a big deal that happened last year with the Ocean Gate, which was its own, I could go on and on about the physics of that. Anyway, but again, they also have a swim bladder that helps them sink and float, depending on if they put gas in it or not. And this is actually something we learned about and use in our own submarines, our own version of, ballast tanks and whatnot with boats and submarines. And we actually probably learned it off of fish. Because one of the first things that we ever, definitely when we hunkered down and had civilization, a lot of the times we'd hunker down along, river banks and ocean banks. And we see a lot of civilizations there. I mean, the birth of civilization on the cradle of the Euphrates was literally, there's the Euphrates River. And so, again, water brings life, water brings civilization. Monty, you can't have my drink because it's not water. You can't have it. Anyway, so they breathe underwater, again, because water is oxygenated. They live in water. They have scales and fins. They're cold-blooded. And they have a ton of eggs. So they have a gazillion eggs. And again, they don't need to do internal fertilization because they live in the ocean. So therefore, their eggs, and they produce a ton because other people are eating them, including us humans. And so that's why they produce a gazillion. Because if you produce a gazillion and a few of them get eaten, hopefully somebody survives. So that's their approach to it, is make a ton of kids. Use all your energy to make as many kids as possible. Somebody will survive. Whereas we're the reverse of that as humans. We make very few kids and put a lot of energy into them to raise them. I know, I have an 11-year-old. So we put a lot of energy into our kids. Hopefully we put a lot of energy into our kids. So we do it in reverse. We don't make as a gazillion business. We don't sink all our biological energy into making a ton of kids and only hoping a couple survive. Although we probably had to do that way back when, if you've ever looked at, yeah. I say that now as more of a modern thing, but back in the day, my dad came from a family he was one of 15 kids, so, by the way, they all survived. So, anyway, so eventually, because the ocean was so freaking populated with everything, and I do mean that, it was crowded. It's kind of like, New York City density. So, and there was a lot of creatures that were like, you know what, we've heard the insects talk about this land thing. Maybe we should try going up there, because now there's an atmosphere and the sun is no longer trying to kill us. And maybe we should try to get up there. So one of the first guys, and we do have fossils of these guys, it's basically, there are fish, and this is a crazy story, there are fish that actually have lungs and not necessarily gills. They're called lungfish. They live in Africa. One of my professors, my zoology professor, actually he was a herpetology professor, but he had a pet lungfish. And he failed us all. Well, not so much, but he was upset because the year I took zoology with him, his lungfish died, and he was very sad. So we offered to buy him a new lungfish, and he just kind of stared at us. He was interesting, dude. Made me memorize a cat skeleton over spring break. That was fun. Anyway, so there's lungfishes, and so we know that fish actually did develop lungs at some point. We also know they started getting more muscle and actual bones in the fins. Because if you look at the fins of a lot of fish, there are muscle, but there's not really bones in fins. There doesn't need to be. Again, you can be a pretty fast swimmer, but you don't really always need bones up there. However, more bones and muscles in a leg means, hey, I can climb. So we just needed fish eventually to put together the lungfish bit with the legged fish bit, or the lobed fin, that's what we call the lobed fin, and come together, and then eventually they could crawl up into the shallows of the ocean on the coasts of land and go, oh, nobody's killing me up here. Awesome. And they can't come up here because they can't breathe out of water, nor do they have lobes. Not legs, we're not there yet. We have lobes, bony lobes. And that's where pretty much our dude, I'm gonna probably boink this, the Tiktaalik, that's fun to say, came up. And we do have his fossil. So he was about 9 feet long, and he looked like a freaky fish salamander thing. And it's basically, or they call it crocodile-like, kind of looks like some kind of freaky Pokemon. But he's basically the first, we think, and pretty much are probably very sure, that this is a transitional species between fish and the first legged animals to walk on land. They actually had a pectoral bone. They actually had a pelvic bone. Again, you need support to get those arms and legs moving, which is why we still have pectorals and pelvic bones for wandering around to this day. So we had several of these. Now, there are some throwbacks, and the reason we actually started thinking about this before we discovered this guy's pretty much his all-wheel drive. He's the one with the all-wheel drive. He's got the back and the front. Some of them only had the front or the back. They didn't have both. So some of them are rear-wheel drive, some of them are front-wheel drive, but this one had the all-wheel drive. Yeah, I didn't come up with that. But anyway, one of the guys that we thought about, because we saw these guys in fossil records for ages, is a coelacanth. And it was funny because back in early 1900s, there was a biologist who was really interested in these guys. And he heard fishermen say, oh yeah, we've seen those. And he's like, what? And they're like, oh yeah, we pull them off the coast of Madagascar all the time. And he's like, oh, I'm going to Madagascar. And he did. He went to Madagascar, got on a ship. All the fishermen are like, hey, could you bring me out and show me that weird fish you keep pulling up? And they're like, okay, I guess. We just throw them back. And yeah, they went out. He went out for several times. He didn't get it in his first run. But eventually they caught one, showed it to him, and he lost his ever-loving mind in a good way. You know, when you get really, really happy about something only you care about, you know, nerding out. So anyway, he nerded out over the coelacanth, wrote a paper and said, they're alive! They did not go extinct. And it's sort of true. The coelacanth we've seen in fossil records, that variety is extinct. The one we see today off the coast of Madagascar, which is not good eaten, by the way, they're basically living evidence that lobefin fishes existed at some point. And actually, fossil records also show this too. So this guy is the modern version of the coelacanth. He is not the coelacanth from the fossil record, but this is his descendant. But we still call them all coelacanths because we do. And they're the first ones that we saw in the first fossil records that really had the lobe fins, as well as this guy right here. But like I said, they had to put that lobe fin together with the lung that actually worked, because gills do not work on land. If you can't force water across your gills, you ain't gonna breathe. And you go. So we needed something to interface with air version, not in the water version. And so it wasn't until we put them together, and then some of these guys got together an all-wheel drive, got up onto the land and said, gosh, it's bright, and then went right back into the water. That's what I would have done. So anyway, so again, we still need water. So this is where we've got the bridge species. We have them. We have the fossil evidence. We have the fossil record. This is not something we just invented. We have the Tiktaalik stuff. So we have these timelines, and we have definite proof that this all happened. So thank you, all-wheel drive dude. And that's where we get the amphibians. Now, eventually, out of that grouping comes the amphibians. So this includes frog, salamander, toads, and caecilians. Caecilians look like the snake version of a lizard, of salamander. They literally just, you know, like that little worm on Sesame Street that's just really cute and has a very round head and a little half-moon mouth and me. Okay, this is dating me. Did you guys even watch Sesame Street? I don't know. Monty, stop playing with that. All right, so, but a caecilian kind of looks like a Muppet version of a worm. It literally kind of looks like that. Look them up. They're really cute. But no notochord. We finally dumped notochords. We have spines. Actual, real spines for basically carrying weight around. We needed a true spine to get that four-wheel drive going and walk around. So we needed something to help us support all our mass and like all our organs. Our coelom, if you will. We needed a skeleton that would support it all and drag it around on land because we don't have water to help us do it anymore. Again, this was a major thing going. It's kind of like going to an alien planet right now. How do you survive on an alien planet? Well, you need to bring everything with you. And the transition from an aquatic life to land is literally like us trying to go to another planet and survive on it. It's basically the same major jump. They had to figure out a way to bring what they needed to live to survive on land because there wasn't any competition up there at first, like there was in the ocean where everybody was eating everybody. And somebody's like, I just want to go where the people aren't. Little Mermaid had it backwards. Oh, no, wait, she had it forwards. I'm sorry. I don't know why. She wasn't trying to leave she wasn't trying to go to the ocean. She was trying to leave the ocean herself. Little Mermaid, man. Anyway, so no notochord. Skin is smooth and moist because these guys have to live in aquatic environments. They have not completely figured out, all right, how do you live without water and not dry out? These guys can dry out. I know. I've seen a few salamanders around here and frogs that didn't get back to wetness in time and turned into leather, but not really leather. They can dry it out. So anyway, so again, these amphibians still need water for breathing and reproduction purposes. Again, they do not have internal reproduction. In other words, the females lay the eggs, and the males come over and release their sperm on top to fertilize it. So they need the water to do that still. Actually, it's funny when frogs mate because it looks like the male is giving the female the Heimlich maneuver, which is kind of true. He'll get on top and actually kind of like help her push on her lower half to push the eggs out. And then he releases his sperm. There's no internal sex whatsoever because what does internal reproduction do? Well, it keeps everything where it can't dry out. Whereas amphibians don't have that problem, so the male just comes up and helps her with a little bit of a Heimlich maneuver to release the eggs, and then he just lets loose with the sperm, and the pond does it for them. And it works really well for them if you've ever seen a whole bunch of tadpoles before in the spring. So it works for them. Also, a lot of these guys have some really interesting, life cycles, especially with frogs, in that they have they start as eggs and then they're little tadpoles swimming around, and eventually as they grow and eat and hopefully aren't eaten by turtles, they grow and eat, they eventually lose their gills, where their lungs actually start working, and they grow back feet and then front feet, and then they're up on the land. So they'll actually have a life cycle, and some salamanders have that as well. Our area here in North Carolina, Western North Carolina, is extremely famous for its different varieties of salamanders. We have a gazillion different types. I was just actually reading about a biologist who came down, several biologists who came down, and they're scrambling to try and make sure that there's a threatened population that only lives here in this area, seeing if the population is okay after Hurricane Helene, all the damage from that, because that can greatly disrupt everything. And so we have the tie for North American salamanders is between North Carolina and Western North Carolina and Northern Washington, I believe. Those are the two meccas for studying salamanders. So if you are interested in salamanders and you would like to study them, welcome to North Carolina and or Washington. Now around the world, on the other hand, there's a whole ton of places. Like the axolotl comes from South America. The axolotl's weird because he stays in his basically his larval, because he keeps his gills, and they stay in the water. They actually do not finish their transition to land like frogs do and other salamanders. So, baby salamanders, they'll have the external gills that, around their neck, but axolotls decided, we don't need that. We're just going to stay in the water. Why do we? They can go to land, but then after that, they can't go back to the water. So they have both lungs and gills. Again, this is another indicative of how they came up out of some groups of fishes, not all of them. A lot of fishes stayed back in the ocean and the water going, yeah, no, I'm not going to that land place. That sounds annoying. Again, they're cold-blooded. They have 4 legs, sometimes more, sometimes less. Like I said, Sicilians, they have no legs. Actually, we found ones with 2 little itty-bitty feet at the front. They look so weird. They're so funny looking. Again, like the fish, they held over on having a ton of eggs because not everybody's going to make it to adult form. Some people are going to get eaten. So they put all their energy into making a ton and then hoping for the best. And again, so far it's worked out. No dissing them. So again, still need water. However, eventually, somebody figured out if I want to go further into land, I need to have to figure out how to keep all my water in me. So, and this is where the reptiles arose. They are the ones that decided, first, no notochord. Again, true spines. We have a true spine. Like Monty here, he has an actual spine, just like we do. And they keep their skin, they keep their water in with dry skin. I know a lot of people go, oh, snakes look slimy, lizards look slimy. They're not. They're actually really silky feeling, depending on the reptile. Monty feels really silky feeling because I just gave him a bath. But there's other snakes that have really, really rough skin. Some of the rattlesnakes have really rough skin. The softest I've ever felt was California king snakes. They feel like silk. They just feel so soft. And king snakes are neat because they eat venomous snakes, and they're also immune to venom. That's why they eat venomous snakes. If they're like, nom nom, and the copperhead's like, ah, and he bites them, he's just like, you're funny, nom nom nom, and eats the copperhead. So if you see rat snakes, a lot of people go, oh, black snake. It could be one of three here in North Carolina. It could be a black racer, which are dinguses. They can be a black rat snake, which are all over the place. They're the ones that climb and fall down a lot because they've got 3 brain cells and they're going for baby birds and up in a nest somewhere. And sometimes they don't exactly look before they crawl badly. They don't leap. No snake jumps. There's no jumping snakes. Sorry. I've observed Monty for many moons. And he only has a little bit of back hip and barely what's left of legs. And he ain't jumping. He's never jumped. He has fallen down from climbing like a dingus, though. And then the last but not least is the black king snake. And black kings, again, never kill them. They will just they actually take care of your venomous snakes. They will eat copperheads, and have no problem doing it. So if you see a black, if you learn the difference, the patterns on the bellies and the top, you can usually figure out from a distance who's who. And if you see a king snake, he's your friend. I know you're like, no, some people are like, no snake, all snakes, the only good snake is a dead snake. No, king snakes, yeah, they take care of your other snake problems. They eat the other snakes. Except for Monty, he's the opposite of a danger noodle. Well, he is a danger to himself more than anything. He's gotten stuck in a chair. He's gotten stuck in, I wear tags, I wear tags and stuff. He actually has gotten his head stuck through this key ring. He's gotten his head stuck in a key ring. He's gotten stuck in a couch. He's gotten stuck in a couch a couple of times. He's gotten stuck on a table. And he cut himself on a table. I had to put Neosporin on his little tail. Tried to put a Band-Aid on, but it falls off. And snakes are reptiles are notoriously slow healers because they are cold-blooded, so their immune system isn't as fast as like us warm-blooded creatures. So, yeah, you're not smooth, dude. I mean, you are smooth, but you're not smooth in the brain department. Anyway, like I said, he is a danger noodle, but only to himself. And I also have a picture where he's gotten he went for a mouse and his teeth he doesn't have fangs, he just has a whole bunch of curled back teeth. And his entire face hooked on his carpet in his house. I'll put that up here so you can see it. Monty's not swift. Anyway, again, they're cold-blooded or exothermic, which means, again, they're the same. Their body internal temperature is the same as around, which is why they go into torpor in the winter. Snakes will actually have this thing where they'll find a nest and they'll actually all huddle together for the winter. And that includes also different species. And that's when people tell me that different species get together. And now there's venomous snakes that look like black snakes because a venomous snake and a black snake mated. And I said, no, that's impossible. It's like me trying to mate a bird. It's not going to make a bird person. Same thing. The reproductive systems are actually quite different. There's some snakes that lay eggs and some snakes that keep the eggs inside of them. And that's actually another adaptation that I'm going to get into is eggs and internal reproduction and external reproduction. So like I said, a lot of reptiles, they all lay eggs. Now, if you look at an egg, and this is, heck, just look at a chicken egg. Again, we have an outside that keeps all the liquid on the inside, so the egg doesn't dry out. So this is another thing. So again, now we're getting into internal reproduction, where we produce an egg, and then the male and the female mate, and then the sperm is introduced into the female internally. So that way it fertilizes the eggs, and then the eggs will grow and develop inside the female until she eventually, lays them for the hatching and everything else. So now, and some eggs have a hard shell, like with, the birds. Again, dinosaurs also kind of had a hard shell too. We've actually found entire clutches of eggs with the baby still inside the eggs. It's actually amazing when we discovered that, a clutch of eggs fossilized with the baby still inside. But a lot of reptiles have leathery eggs to it, and they actually grow an egg tooth. Monty would have had an egg tooth right there. And they actually have to cut open through the leathery outside of the egg to actually hatch. And again, why do we have that leathery outside of the egg? To keep the liquid in so the baby doesn't dry out. It's basically to bring the ocean with us. We are oceans onto ourselves. We brought the ocean with us, so that way we didn't have to go back to the ocean and not dry out, unlike the amphibians back here, that if they get too far, then they dry out, they die. So the reptiles figured out how to bring the ocean not only inside of them, but also to protect their young. So that is what an egg is. It is literally a liquid environment, so the embryo can grow, and eventually, when it's ready to hatch out into a dry environment, it can hatch out, and it's ready to go, and it won't dry out. So again, this is what reptiles did. They have the scales so they don't dry out. They have hard eggs, either the ones like chicken eggs or bird eggs, again, or the leathery ones, again, to keep the liquid inside. It's all about where you keep your water. And they have internal reproduction, again, to keep the liquid inside. So this can all function. So that's lizards, turtles, alligators, and dinosaurs. Dinosaurs are kind of an in-between. They're a split off of reptiles, and they eventually, one of the dinosaur groupings, split off into birds, and what we know today as birds. And way back further when, reptiles split, again, what would become modern reptiles, and went the mammal route, which is why we actually have mammals that are half reptile, half mammal-y. I'll get to them in a minute. The marsupial crew is weird. So birds, again, these are former dinosaurs. This is what's left of dinosaurs. So when you go outside and you see a bird, you go, your ancestors were dinosaurs. And the bird will look at you and be like, yeah, okay, I knew that. Let me peck your eyeballs out. Because birds are freaks. I don't know. If you've got pet birds, cool. I'm totally down. I've just worked with too many birds at the zoo that I know the birds have it out for me. And I'm fine with that. They can be small, brightly colored dinosaurs. All they want. They've earned it. So anyway, their forelimbs are adapted for flying, with the exception of penguins and emus, which penguins is for swimming, and emus and ostriches is for mating dances. And if you've ever seen an ostrich mating dance, it's quite funny. Lots of dancing. There was an emu at the zoo. He was unfortunately imprinted on humans. His name was Godfrey. And it's interesting because male emus, a lot of people would walk up and go, ostrich! And it's like, no, emus are from Australia. Ostriches are from Africa. Emus are smaller. And they still have insane kicking powers, though. But Godfrey loved us ladies, and when it was mating season for the emus, he would come, and while I was cleaning out his pen, he would dance for me beautifully to entice me to be his mate. Thankfully, it never went further than that. One time he did eat my hand, but that was only because there was a bug and my hand at the same spot, and he ate the bug, but also got my hand. It did not hurt, it just felt really weird to have my hand inside of his beak. I'm just saying, it was a weird feeling. Anyway, and he let go. It was not a big deal. It was just a weird feeling that day. And then we never spoke of it again. We, made the eye contact and we were like, yeah, we're never going to speak of that again. Anyway, But emus actually, interestingly enough, take care of the male. Actually takes care of the egg. So once a male attracts a female, and they do their mating dance thing, and they get together, and the female lays the egg, gets up and leaves. So the male actually will starve himself, incubating, sitting, and taking care of the egg until it hatches, and then he will raise the egg. He will raise the baby. So males actually do all the work in the emu family, which is weird, but also good for them, I guess. Not always working in other things. So again, they have feathers, which are modified scales, and literally, if you look at a scale off a reptile and a bird feather, you will see it. You will be like, oh wow, these are, yeah, I can see where one came from the other one. Again, you can see it on their legs too. If you've ever had to tangle with a bird, their legs are pretty much still in dinosaur land. I mean, that's why I love occasionally when my neighbor's turkeys come over and escape and come over and go, hello, do you have food? Can we drink out of your nasty water? It's like, here's some fresh water. I do not want the fresh water. I want the nasty water. It's like, okay. But their legs, if you look at the legs, it's extremely a throwback to basically dinosaurs. I mean, you're looking at bird legs, you're looking at dinosaur legs. They have a 4-chambered heart. Again, they came up with it first, before they came it concurrently with us, and modern birds came up with it concurrently off of the dinosaurs, who also had a 4-chambered heart, because it's the only thing to explain that much mass. That 5-chambered, but it's actually a 3-chambered, but with some extra partitions, heart wouldn't have worked in a dinosaur body, so we're pretty darn sure that dinosaurs had a 4-chamber heart. Just from being that size, you needed something that could handle that. So they evolved from a subset of dinosaurs. Not all dinosaurs went this route. They're just the survivors. Hear the survive. Anyway, so, and unfortunately, though, we're in the 6th die-off on this planet, a major extinction event, and unfortunately, that's where the birds are going. Now, we used to be killing them way more than we used to. Back when women had fashionable feathery hats, actually, we almost destroyed most of the population of birds in North America, until Roosevelt finally put a law into effect that said stop killing all the birds for women's hats. And fashion actually had to change because we were actually making birds go extinct to make fluffy, feathery hats. It's weird if you go back in history and look at the things we've had to do to save species, because you're like, oh, you think that's a modern thing, and it's really not. We've had to do that several times, going, we need to do something or we're going to be out of everything. So, yeah. So, that was a history lesson there for you for the U.S. Anyway, that brings us to mammals, although we have to talk about one group before we jump into the other group. So what sets mammals apart from everybody else? Yeah, we did come out of the ancient reptile line. It split, like I said, turned into modern reptiles, and the other way turned into us mammals. I know you're probably like, nuh-uh, and I get that. Because if you look at us mammals, and you look at Monty, you're probably like, no. And you're not wrong in some senses, but in other senses, let me explain. So we have hair, which again, if you look under a microscope, it looks like a whole bunch of scales on a core or a shaft. We're warm-blooded or endothermic because we need to move around, and we also decided to go into places that are freaking cold and survive there. Kind of like how we got pushed out of warm spaces, how a bunch of creatures got pushed out of water onto the land because of everybody was eating everybody and it was kind of busy, and going out and finding niches. Well, it pays to be endothermic, and we can go into temperatures that are cooler than us, and we can still have a metabolism run instead of shutting down like reptiles do when they get too cold and they go into stupor. And apparently that's a thing in Florida. Like if there's a flash freeze or a flash frost warning, all of a sudden all the Oh, I can see them in my mind. The big green lizards. They just kind of fall and go, ah, until it warms up, and then they're like, oh, and they walk off. They're really mean because they'll whip you with their tails. It'll come back to me. I can see it in my head. I'll do it again. I'll just put the picture up here. Future when we'll put the picture up and go, duh. Anyway, so now, where did mammals come from? Well, thankfully we have Australia, which is one of the last bastions of the marsupial group, which is a group that split off. And luckily when Australia split off, it kind of took them with them. So the modern marsupials are thankfully still around. The only marsupial that's still around on all the other land masses that survived the takeover of the mammals, who were way more adept at being, adapted to the land and all the niches and the different biomes, is the possum. So if you see a possum, congratulations. Your possum is, he's the last, he's again the winner of the marsupials because they're a marsupial. They're not a mammal. And I got the hiccups again. So marsupials, for the most part, died off because mammals were just hard to compete with. We were the better, quicker, faster version of what they were. And therefore they died off with the exception of the, possums who go, and they look like freaks sometimes when they do that. But other than that, they're really good mommies. And they eat all the ticks. They're good to have around because they actually eat a ton of ticks and a lot of things that would turn around, and if they bite us, we get like Rocky Mountain spotted fever and stuff like that, which is not good. It has long-lasting effects even after you've shaken it. So thank your local marsupial. Thank him dearly for not just being roadkill. Actually, no, that's sad. But for eating all the bad bugs. So, I'd walk out and thank them, but they'd hiss at me. Anyway, so, again, the marsupials, if you look at them, especially things like the duck-billed platypus and echidnas, you can definitely see they look like a hybrid of a reptile and a mammal. They really do. They've got, still have scales on their legs. They lay eggs. They have venom. They have venomous spurs. Because they were just like, yeah, I may look cute and weird. They also glow under black lights. We don't know why. We just discovered that a couple of years ago because somebody just, put a black light up and the duck-billed platypus started glowing. You can Google it. I'll put an image up here. It's weird. I don't understand it. Nobody does. We don't understand why, other than they wanted to have sweet, sweet rave parties before humans invented raves. I do not know. So that's a fact, that duck-billed platypus glow under black light. I know, now you want to go down to Australia and see if everybody glows under a black light, but apparently not. Anyway, echidnas. And I don't mean Knuckles from Sonic the Hedgehog. Haha. They actually don't look anything like Knuckles from Sonic the Hedgehog. But anyway, so these guys, if you look at them, again, they still lay eggs. They look half reptile, half mammal. And again, later on down the road, we have marsupials that we finally said, you know what, eggs are kind of inconvenient. Wouldn't it be easier to carry our babies with us until it's time to lay? And some snakes are looking at us going, duh. Because there are some modern snakes that are here in North America that actually carry their eggs inside after they're fertilized and let the eggs hatch inside mom, and then babies crawl out. So they're called live-bearing snakes. And a lot of our venomous snakes, like copperheads and cottonmouths and rattlesnakes, all do this. Monty does not. Monty's species is from Africa originally, and Monty's species has those leathery eggs. So, and it's funny because after a ball python hatches, they actually will just sit there in their egg for several days going, I don't know if I want to come out. It's so big. And I get that, especially in the morning when I don't feel like getting out of bed. So, anyway, so we decided, okay, if we're keeping everything internal, why don't we keep the eggs internal too? And that's where we had to come up with, how do we have kids without eggs? And we technically still have eggs. The female makes an egg and it has to, merge with the sperm from a guy, and then it fertilizes and turns into a zygote, and then a blastula, and yada, 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 deuterostomes, rear ends, all that fun stuff. So, but what if we just did it all inside? And so the marsupials showed us this in-between we went from eggs to mammals. Because if you look at again, if you turn around, look at, say an ancient, we get back in Miss Royal's magic school bus and we go back in time to primordial, or not primordial Earth, but, basically when those reptiles were wandering around that were going to eventually turn into mammals, you'd be like, yeah, how do you go from egg to pregnancy? And that's basically marsupials on Australia gave us that in-between step, and that is the premature babies are actually born, and then they grow and go into a pouch and grow, and that's why we have all the pouch marsupials. So again, what happens is when they give birth, now here's going to be a fun thing. So a kangaroo gives birth, and the baby is actually the size of a gummy bear. So imagine a little gummy bear-sized fetus, and they lick their fur down from, where they give birth, and they lick their fur down and make a wet thing, and the baby, who is blind and doesn't really have too many senses other than to follow the wetness, follows mom's licked down slick of path of fur into the pouch, falls into the pouch and finds a tiny nipple in there, and then attaches to it and grows the rest of the way, and that becomes the joey. And then everybody goes, oh, they're so cute. And they're actual... They can fight you to pieces, man. Don't get into a fight with a kangaroo. They will dork you up. Anyway. So, yeah. And so we went from that to just saying, you know what? How about we just keep the baby in? And that's where pregnancy came in. And if you want more fun of how that works, may I suggest taking anatomy and physiology, where I get me and all the other mothers taking the class to tell everybody who hasn't had kids yet how much fun that is. I'm not going to do it here. It's a bit much for this class, I think. But we give birth to live young. In other words, we don't have eggs. Mammal mothers nurse their young with milk. We have lungs that need to air to breathe. So, we also have forelegs, but, we have ears that stick out. Again, you don't see ears on Monty because he doesn't have any ears. And yes, it's true. Snakes cannot hear. So I've been talking this whole time and Monty has no clue. It's probably why he still hasn't passed any of my classes. We're warm-blooded. We have a lot of different senses. So it's really interesting. Again, major points. We have hair, we have mammary glands, and we're endothermic. Now, crazy part is some mammals, again, got reversed in the fact that now the land is really, really popular and there's a lot of competition on the land. And some mammals said, well, screw this, I'm going back in the ocean. And that's what became of a lot of our friends like the dolphins and the whales and the killer whales or the orcas, because the orcas are actually top dog of the ocean. Because we've discovered that they like to eat great white sharks just for funsies. Literally for funsies. And orca have been known to actually work with humans to hunt other whales. Interestingly enough, down in Australia, before white people came, there was a tribe on the bottom of Australia, the southern end, and they actually went out hunting with orca. There was an entire pod of orca that lived pretty much side by side with this coastal tribe. And when white people came in, they actually kept it up. The tribe taught them how to whale with the whales they were going for, and the tribe and the white people worked together for quite a while with the orca hunting down the other whales, because the orca always got a cut of the hunt. So that's why the orca kept it up. Unfortunately, of course, politics and power and all that fun jazz, the white people eventually betrayed the tribe and started killing the whales just for themselves, and also turned around and started trying to kill the killer whales too. Did not like that, so the pod left. However, in recent years, we've seen it again. Orca have shown up with fish and given it to humans. So yeah, they're also sinking yachts somewhere else, but in other pods have come up and started going, hey, let's hunt together, which I think is amazing. So, it's just how intelligent these guys are. They are so crazy intelligent. Absolutely nuts, intelligence-wise. When we sit there and we go, oh yeah, humans are the only ones that are intelligent. No. Trust me, dolphins are insanely intelligent, and there's a bazillion different types of them. And same thing with orca. We're finding there's a whole bunch of different subspecies. We didn't know about that, and there's actually a whole bunch of just, different packs from all around the world. And the funny part is the ocean, and their singing, it kind of makes it like our own internet, and the fact that they can long distance talk to each other. And we've seen evidence of this where there was, for several years, there was just one pod that would wear dead fish on their heads, and they thought it was really funny, I guess. So did we. And we were, studying this one pod, and they all just would put dead fish on their heads, like, check out my dead fish. It's kind of like, I don't know, it's their version of wearing, Jordans. I'm not kidding you. It was very fashionable to be an orca with a dead fish on your head. And then across the Atlantic, on the other side of the Atlantic, another pod started up and started doing, hey, did you hear about the guys on the other end? They're wearing dead fish on their heads. Let's wear dead fish on our heads. And they did. So the ocean and them singing in it is like our version of, hi, I love you too, is just like the internet. So their weirdness, their memes is wearing a dead fish on their head. And strangely enough, just beginning of this year, scientists noticed again that there's another pod somewhere else in the Pacific is starting to do it, wear dead fish on their heads. So, it's an old meme, but, it still works. So wear a dead fish on your head, be an orca, sink a yacht. Because unfortunately what happened was a yacht hit a baby, and mommy was not happy with that, and mommy sunk a yacht. And then all of them said, sink yachts. They don't kill the humans on the yachts, they just sink the yacht. So they haven't correlated, thankfully. Humans own the yachts. Maybe we should kill the humans, but so don't piss them off. They remember. And then they tell their friends through the internet that is the ocean. So don't mess with orca. Actually, don't mess with a lot of large mammals. They're just going to dork you up. Anyway, so there it is. This is where he goes over the core dates, probably a little faster than I do.
Next time someone asks you who you think you are.
But anyway, so there you go. That's the core dates. And now we're completely finished with all the kingdoms. And now I'm going to, in the next lecture, jump into ecology really quickly so we can dip our toe into it. And then pretty much we're done with the course. Congratulations. You've just survived General Biology 2. And thank you for coming along. And I'll see you in the next lecture where we talk about ecology. Right, Monty? Thank you so much. Goodbye.